Hi everyone, and welcome to our first Nexus webinar. This is a series that we're looking at how schools are coping with the current COVID-19 crisis. We had a technical hitch, so you may notice my shirt changes shortly. It's because I'm filming this after the live webinar, just to go through the introduction that didn't record, unfortunately. For those of you who are new to Nexus, we're a community enterprise built from a network of educators and providers in education, helping to provide funding, training and resources through a completely free platform to all teachers across the globe. So if you'd like more information on how you can access this, you go to nexus-education.com, where you can subscribe to be kept aware of future chats we'll be hosting as well. We'll also put that in the description for this video. So with me during the webinar was Derek Peaple. Derek Peaple is a head teacher from Park House School, where he's been there since 2003. During that time, he played a key role in regional, national and international education initiatives. He supported the design of the values-themed London 2012 Get Set education programme and was subsequently appointed as the first chair of the Youth Sports Trust's National Headteacher Strategy Group. Alongside this, Derek had accolades such as being nominated the TES Headteacher of the Year Award. He'd received the Sir John Madejski Award for Outstanding Contribution to Education and Sport, and he contributed to the House of Commons Education Committee's report. So before we move over to Derek, the first question I asked him was about how this is an unprecedented situation, but is it as unprecedented as everyone's saying? Had he come across anything similar crisis in his school before? Over to Derek.
I hesitate to make any comparison at all to the sorts of closures that we've had through inclement weather or snow or whatever that is. But basic systems that would be in place there to keep continuity of learning over a matter of day or days. And what does that communication strategy look like to staff? Obviously, on a much smaller scale, that was the case. We just scaled that up and moved it into different sorts of dimensions. So I suppose it's not completely unprecedented in a school setting. It's just the extent and length of what this is likely to look like. Although I suppose if you have in place, as I suppose I'm sure most schools do, that communication strategy for that emergency closure, it's just how you scale that up. And go back to those basic principles. And if you're already a cohesive community, if you've already got those good channels of communication and good relationships, and I guess most of us are using social media, whether that's Twitter or Facebook, usually for relentless propaganda about how good the school is. But you can use that in different mechanisms now to create that sense of community, but also to get out that important information. And I'm briefing parents. They know that they get a briefing from me on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, which are substantive. Obviously, if there's anything in the interim that they need to be told, that's happening.
Brilliant. So I'm going to move. I think it's quite a good point. You talk about the preparations and the communications element of what schools should already have in place, but it's scaling up. I'm going to move on to the questions that we've had sent in, and I've split these up, Derek, into areas that I thought they fit in. So I've got remote learning that we're going to cover, health and well-being. We'll cover curriculum, training and CPD. School finances, and then looking towards the future of what this crisis means to education. I'll open up before I get into remote learning, but just one of the curious people who I've seen they're watching the stream now at the moment is Bobby O'Sullivan. Wanted to know, I guess, about the practicalities of how you're running the school, and are you using a rota system for staff to go into schools at the moment, or all staff expected? What are you planning to do over Easter?
Okay, right. So obviously, firstly, when this developed, sort of 10 days ago, we were looking at what our staffing levels were, and I started to run the school down in terms of year group by year group, and we were actually prioritising keeping the sevens in terms of childcare, the likely challenges that there would be there with the youngest pupils. I was particularly concerned about continuity of learning for year 10s, who whatever happens to the examination system, they're probably going to go through in the summer of 2021 and 12s, effectively 11s and 13s, knowing what we knew about the system there, provided we got to the ends of the courses. Somewhat paradoxically, our concern wasn't so much there. I was already finding that there were a number of staff who were socially distancing or isolating for a number of reasons, pregnant partners or had concerns and so forth. But it became pretty clear that we were going to need to run things right down by that Friday, even if there wasn't going to be a national statement around that. So we worked up pretty quickly what a staff rota would look like for ensuring that our children are key workers and vulnerable youngsters were covered immediately, and we got intelligence out and comms out to parents very quickly on that, I think around Wednesday or Thursday, so we knew what the extent was likely to be on a day-to-day basis. Clearly we knew centrally what our vulnerable youngsters look like and our EHCPs look like. What we didn't know was what the professional profile of our parents necessarily was. So that was the key piece of intelligence. On that, then we worked up a 3-week rota, which took us till the end of the holidays in terms of what we needed on a day-to-day basis. And pretty quickly, when it became clear that we were down to effectively single figures in, we had people standing down. So we had basic, I've been in every day, I've been supported by a member of SLT every day. We've ensured that we have a male and female member of staff in every day to monitor and support on site the remote learning that's going on with all of our other students who are at home. The expectation has been that we've followed a normal timetable. The day has run normally, and students have been encouraged to be doing the work that's been set for them, history period 1, French period 2, geography period 3, and so forth. All other staff are available online at that particular point in time to answer email questions that would come through that they don't understand question 2 on the what were the causes of the First World War or whatever it might be. But there's no direct teaching going on of groups below 11. We've been using Teams to actually do some real-time teaching to our year 12s. And we think that's where we'll limit that, because we've got pretty small A-level groups that are manageable, they're between 4 to 10, 12 or whatever it might be. And we'll probably pick up on all the GDPR and safeguarding issues around this in due course a little bit later on the welfare bit. But at the moment, the school's been running in real time online. I've got a minimum of 2 members of staff in every day. The PE department have been coming in on a rota as well to ensure that there's some physical activity going on with those youngsters who are in with professionals, rather than just it being made up by the teachers that are in. But essentially that's where we've got to. It looks as though during the holiday period, and I'm sure this is replicated, we will be running, we're going to run throughout the holiday. Again, we've got the information from all of our key workers. It's very low numbers. We've decided across the local authority we're not going to go to a hub arrangement, because in these disconcerting times, I think the view is that children are going to want to go to the schools that they know with the staff that they're going to know, and I'd rather stay open for 2 children. And I think that's the view of what colleagues are generally. So again, we've gone to an SLT rota over the holiday period, with male female on at that particular point in time, and I've also got basic site staff in and so forth. We think probably we're going to find ourselves with numbers going up after Easter, as more and more pressure is put on those key workers, particularly NHS staff, and we think we're going to see an increase actually. So we're not running any rota down. I'd rather tell people that they're on and then get them to stand down, rather than say you're clear on this for the time being. So that's currently the situation that we're in. Sorry, I can't pick you up there. Sorry, Mike, I've lost you. I'll try and type.
Is that any better, Derek? Can you hear me?
Back.
Brilliant.
Back. Sorry.
Just to clarify, this is a question that was asked in the chat by Joanne Ladd. Who I've got some more questions from Joanne. She's from Rishworth School, and she just asked. So you've not had to furlough anyone as of yet?
No, I mean, given our staffing structure, everybody's still on. I had a number of short-term vacancies that were covered by supply staff. That was passed over to the agencies to deal with. We've got administrative staff that are out working on plans that my office manager and my support staff leads have actually set up. So there's still work that's going on, and I'm trusting the professional integrity, if I'm brutally honest on that, at the moment, that there is remote working that can be achieved there. I've honoured commitments. We had one member of supply staff that was going from temp to perm. I think if you've got any integrity at all, and you talk about values, you honour that. I'm not looking to. I'm not because I'm going to need that colleague anyway. So, in terms of all practicality. So no, we haven't. We've got we buy an independent catering contract. It's been down to those organisations to deal with their staff under their own approaches. So we haven't at the moment. No, is the short answer.
And you mentioned it previously, just a little while ago, this is also asked from Joanne Lads, about using Microsoft Teams to engage with. Was it just, did you say just your year 12s?
Well, I think going forward, so I've been using Teams in two ways. From the point of view of leadership and management. So my senior leadership team, we've been having a Teams meeting every morning at 8 o'clock. Extending that for as long as we need, but essentially that's just been to check off that we're happy with comms and ensuring. I mean, I've got a senior leadership team of 7, so we're just checking in on safeguarding leads, what's been coming through, what work's been going on with my lead on teaching and learning in the conversations that she's been having with heads of department about how they see learning going in terms of that position after Easter and so forth, and then just the operational stuff that you might expect. So I've used it as a leadership and management tool.
Sorry about that, everyone. Technical hitch. It couldn't have happened without that. So we'll crack straight back onto where we were, Derek. And
it was picking up on the Teams, wasn't it? I seem to recall.
Yes.
Yeah. So using that for we talked about how we were just using it as a management tool, but looking at that from the point of view of some live teaching to 12s, which is the only live teaching that I've expected this week. My understanding is that there isn't any reason why lessons can't be recorded, and I think part of what we've been picking up on some of the the safeguarding. Obviously, if we're using Teams and we're using all of our school approved mechanisms, there shouldn't be issues there. But certainly that's where we are on Teams at the moment. That's what we've decided as a school we're using, because we are more familiar than that. I mean, obviously we're on Zoom now, and I've used various others in the course of the week, but that seems to be a school-based decision for the reasons also that we can sort of guarantee security better in that respect.
You mentioned previously as well, Derek, about, and obviously you're using technology well, you mentioned about this technology is all out there to schools already. They most likely have it already, but they're just not using it as extensively as they're going to have to. Do you think they'll need more support? This is a question from Dr. Anthony Edkins.
I'm almost certain. I mean, with every challenge comes the opportunity, and I think when I started teaching 33 years ago, a cracking lesson on the impact of the First World War involved reading some war poetry, and if you had the Betamax coverage of something from Blackadder, and we move on in terms of the way in which we work. And I think this is a massive opportunity to think about this experience and really learn from it. However, we've moved from scenarios, I think, where we don't have this Luddism in terms of how technology might be used, but we're only scratching the surface. And one begins to look at teams, and I've got to the point where I can pull up a document perhaps, but in terms of interactivity and so forth, I think the opportunity for some structured CPD and professional development around that, and again, I think this period offers that sort of opportunity, will be very significant in terms of enriching learning in a blended way when we return. If I think about what's going on in the morning, if I was to do and I was doing it on a normal day, a learning walk around my school, I would see a variety of practice. I'm sure I will see the same virtually if I was able to do that now. And I think the key is going to be continuing that diversity, but I think it will be significantly enriched by this experience. And I think we will learn in different ways, but it will need to be supported.
And you say about the kind of the variance in ability, it's the same in classrooms as digitally, and when teachers are responsible for teaching digitally. How do you find managing your teams? This is a question actually from Ben Holton, was asking about from Reed, Hampshire Supply Services, how you'd find managing your teams remotely.
Right. So what we've done, obviously with my senior leadership team, I think I've probably already said that we're in this current phase, we're doing a Teams meeting at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. I don't necessarily think that needs to be sustained at that level. I will have subgroup meetings going forward. But prior to this, I would have had one extended strategic SLT meeting in the week, and we would have had 2 briefings as well. I can't see why that can't continue virtually and online for the foreseeable future. With the line management structures that we would have ordinarily, and I guess there's probably be more dialogue going on with heads of departments, heads of learning, and heads of learning, it's a phrase we use for heads of years, and their teams, because there's been the expectation that that's gone on. And very specifically, over the last 2 days, as I said, we've moved into this transitional phase now where we've moved beyond survival into planning forward. There have been, every department has been having that online virtual departmental meeting about what they see as the best approaches to the next phase of learning, because it can't be an SLT diktat. I've got 70 staff out there delivering. They've got to have ownership of that. Equally, I think we need to think about what the overall experience of these young people are going to be. Are they getting 17 projects that are being pushed out at the same time? Are they all being asked to interact in a particular way? And I think we've got to take, and we've got a little bit of breathing space now where we can take an overview of that during the holiday period and ensure that we've got that balance, both within the curriculum, each curriculum area, and across the curriculum, and indeed across year groups. So I think that's where we are. So those conversations via Teams are going on within the departmental teams. That's going to feed back tomorrow into a more strategic planning meeting. So that's essentially how we've managed that. But critically, I mean, I've always done a 5-minute briefing in the morning 3 times a week, just so people see each other in the staff room. And we kind of kept the discipline of that as well, because it's really important that we hold every level of the community together, I think, during this period. And communication is critical to that. And I mean, I'm pushing out, blogs, and, clearly it's not a humorous situation, but you've got to keep some brevity and lightness of touch. So we've created our virtual, I think we call it chit chat at Park House. Just the sort of stuff that would have gone on, just how we focused on business. Of course we have through the formal communications, but you've got to keep people connected.
It's a lot of, I guess, what you've been saying, Derek, is it's a lot of self-review. You're trusting your staff members to come to you and say, this is what's not working, this is what is working. But as key to all that, the actual kind of hard management is the soft management and maintaining a social environment within. Absolutely. And I think we've really valued, we have a number of staff who are also parents at the school, so they've got a dual perspective on what's been happening in terms of the learning they've come through. And I pushed out a briefing yesterday
that said, SLT are going to be having a look at the way the learning, and I worded that badly, and it seemed to imply that SLT were going to be pushing out a diktat, which actually isn't my style. Genuinely, it's not. And people then came straight back and said, and then we came back and said, no, it's you've got to engage with that in the same way. I trust your professional judgment, your integrity. The school's performed, pretty well over the 17 years that I've been here. I trust your professional judgment on that, to have those conversations in the same way that you'd be talking about the delivery of the history curriculum if it was in physical classrooms.
You can't physically watch everyone, and it wouldn't be the right style of management to fit with you. So no.
And again, you're using your. We all know in our schools, and we're pretty poor leaders and managers if we don't, where the areas of outstanding practice are and where the areas for development are. So we're coaching and supporting that as well. And interestingly, we might see some shifts here where those departments who are at the forefront of the use of technology but may have areas for development in other areas, it's a great opportunity to share practice once we get over this initial survival period, I think.
Of course. I think it leads on quite well into the next topic of health and well-being, actually talking about maintaining the social atmosphere and empowering your staff to basically review themselves and give feedback what works and what doesn't. But I just want to ask one question that someone, Matt Folliard, has asked just in the questions on the webinar. Do all your students have access to the internet from home? And how do you get those who may not have their own devices?
Really very good question. We already had that intelligence from the point of view of our review of PP in particular, but also very specific circumstances. The two issues here, one I think is the actual internet access, but also what that means in terms of data and the costs of data, and also the fact that if you've got a home working environment where you've got two parents who may be working from home and needing to access equipment as well, alongside the expectation of the young people maintaining continuity in their learning. So the preemptive bit on that is that we have, as you would expect, a significant stock of laptops that would be used flexibly in a school context. So before we actually closed, we got a number of those out to where we felt we needed them.
Brilliant.
There's then been individual conversations between my SLT lead and my IT director on where we think there may be additional need and discrete investigation of that. The other conversation that we're having at the moment is actually with some of the providers, and I don't know if Park House is in Newbury, which is the UK headquarters of Vodafone, and we're looking at, we're having some interesting conversations there about what Vodafone might be able to do for the community in terms of data. There's some interesting work that's going on. I mean, I'm also involved at community level with the work that's going on for communities, so where we can actually provide that sort of support for where it's needed. But this would be a great opportunity, and then of Vodafone to put something back in the community to support those. In a very small number of instances where we haven't closed that gap or we're not closing it quick enough, we have got paper resource out, but that's not the way forward long term.
Of course. And just one very more pertinent question actually before we move into health and well-being, from Betty Powdrill. She's asked, if parents are struggling to motivate their children to work as well at home as they do in school, what could be your advice for helping to motivate them?
Well, I think we're listening and learning all of the time. I mean, it comes down, I guess, to the sort of extent of engagement that they would experience in the lesson. That if it's engaging material, it is more likely to hold them. I think probably we're finding smaller chunks work better. I was a bit concerned that what we might get back to are, is the sort of scenario where somebody would sit the 6-week project with nothing that was along that, and how demotivating would that be? And we're also trying to push out alongside, wherever it's possible, some sort of guidance notes to parents as well, just to give some tips about what might help there. We're finding pretty positive feedback generally, but we are seeing the variation, and it tends to be again between departments, and we're picking up on this, where it's been either too open-ended or conversely too tight, that parents have felt that they've had to monitor each activity very, very closely. So that's where I think we're trying to strike the balance. I wouldn't be telling anything like the truth if I said we got that right yet.
Mm-hmm. Of course, 2 seconds, Derek. I'm just going to try and make David the co-host of the session. It may knock you off, but we'll bring you back.
Okay.
No, it hasn't, so that's fine. People may have seen we've got some trolls in. That's an important learning of how do you cope with trolls when you're using things like Twitter and Facebook. And
that was a very live discussion for us earlier today, because the local authority pushed out some new absolutely appropriate advice in relation to the safety and security of this. And we keep coming back to the fact that if we are using our email, and we've agreed Teams, everything is therefore secured, and as far as it's possible to secure under that, rather than some of our actually very creative but a little maverick teachers going off piste with that to some extent, for absolutely when one understands the right reasons. But that's why it's important, I think, that we rein that back to ensure that as far as possible we're guaranteeing the security that we can, to avoid the sort of stuff that we're seeing there. But that's,
apologies for that, everyone.
No, it's not. I haven't had that sort of one of the advantages of the last 10 days has been that you haven't had the flow of stuff that you get just in terms of behaviour, and you have been able to focus on teaching and learning a little bit more.
Julie Keys, actually, just to interrupt you there, Julie Keys has just put an excellent point in the chat about the document released by the ISI around safeguarding, so that may be of interest for some people. But moving on to health and well-being, I think, Derek, now. We had a couple of questions sent in before that I think you've touched on about empowering your staff, but how are you prioritising mental well-being of staff currently with what is a very stressful time for everyone?
Well, I suppose it's firstly it's hopefully the virtually open door, in the same way that you've got a physically open door when you're at school, and that is part of. I think it starts with a culture of being able to to talk and share, whether that's whoever that's with, whether that's your immediate line manager, whether it's another colleague, and so forth. So I think rather than systems, it starts culturally in the first instance. So I think that's absolutely critical. As I think I probably alluded to earlier, in some shape or form, there's an individual check-in within. I'm kind of careful how I use teams now, within the departmental or the year group teams. So that's clear. At a very practical level, I've probably got more intelligence coming through of people's physical welfare, just monitoring levels of attendance, whether that's through the rota or actually who's working online, and then that can be picked up via a phone call. An SLT are getting those calls out as well, or I'm picking those up if we have any particular concern. So it's just the importance of that communication coming through. The systems have just been there because we've been needing to communicate in this way, but I would take it back to culture in the first instance. I mean, I've got more widely and this overlaps with student welfare. I mean, there are a number of staff with specific welfare briefs, which, although they are specifically student outward facing, I think they're the sort of colleagues that also would be seen as being approachable if colleagues in any way felt that they were isolated from this process. And I think it's important to mobilise them. I think I've referenced that we've set up the sort of the virtual chat room chit chat act to ensure that this isn't simply business driven. Have you set the work for X or Y. This is about maintaining that degree of community. We've pushed out. We have a strong house system at school, and we've called it in-house challenges as opposed to house challenges, and all staff are members of those houses. So there's, it's what's the most creative cake, who's doing the most creative bit of gardening, and again, that's just been about ensuring that everybody's connected in those particular in that particular way. It's not overtly around welfare, but it's also ensuring that we're keeping those.
It all contributes
to make a school, a community together.
Of course, and I know from our perspective at Nexus, just the fact that in the morning when Damien and I are signing into our conversations, just having that human contact still, it's helping. So I can see how that would be helping. I guess from the other side of the coin, Derek, how are you looking after your vulnerable pupils and ensuring that the well-being of the pupils is also maintained? That's a question from Max at St. Joseph's.
So in terms of the most vulnerable, we still are having face-to-face contact because those students are coming into school, and it's been largely my Senko, who's also an assistant head, that's been managing those sorts of relationships, but also with a number of those colleagues that I referenced. So I have a number of wellbeing coordinators. We're a former sports college. We put a lot of emphasis on active well-being as well. So there's been those sorts of communications going out. We've retained our counselling services, and those with the appropriate agreements have been going on remotely. And I think that's been important, that there's been continuity there as well. We've always had the ability to flag remotely any concerns. We have an email address called Smile Online at Park House, where youngsters can push through any concerns that they've had, and staff have been monitoring that on an hour-by-hour basis. Clearly, our intelligence, as you would hope, through all of our welfare guidance and support systems, would be we would have an initial idea about where some of our greatest concerns would be, so ensuring the regularity of dialogue there. But I think this will also manifest itself in different sorts of ways, and quite a lot of what we had coming through is that this is a particularly conscientious student. I'm going to say she, but it's going to he is already becoming concerned that they're falling behind because they haven't been doing, and I think it's been pushing out those sorts of reassurances, both through general communications, specific communications. We've had an email address for every year group. All parents know the professional addresses of all of the staff that they can communicate to, but we've had generic year 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 6th form at Park House, so that there's been those lines of communications as well. And I think we're as confident as we can be that through those mechanisms, we're picking up the generic and unexpected, as well as those that we would have been that we would have been looking to work with anyway. And that hasn't stopped. That it's just obviously happening at a distance, or in some cases, as I said earlier, face to face, because those students are in.
Brilliant. And I think we'll move on to curriculum, because we're fast running out of time, actually, Derek. I hope you haven't got to rush off anywhere shortly, because we may be overrunning slightly by the look of things. But
no particular place to go, as the song. Yeah.
Like much of the country, that's
yeah, indeed. Yeah, and I guess many of you aren't going anywhere either. So
moving on to curriculum, I'm going to pick up the first question that's been sent in to us from Stephen Park. So Stephen Park goes back into remote learning as well. A lot of schools are benefiting currently from being digital in large areas of the curriculum. So which areas of the school and other schools have you identified as requiring more digitalization from the EdTech industry? And that actually there was another question that was asked live during the webinar. I think James Macy asked, how can EdTech companies support schools better?
I mean, I think there's an interesting bit around the creative curriculum, and I think how we might be looking, to areas like the performing arts, how that's most effectively supported. Those are one of the questions that were coming through earlier, that we had in the early phases, how we're sharing that. I don't think there's any particular unevenness, but I think going back to that earlier answer, how much more creatively we all could use, and I'm going back to teams again because that's what we focused on. We haven't scratched the surface of that as far as I can see, and I'm sure there's much more out there as well that again we're not aware of. So I think that's probably where I would think that we've got greatest need
around training and developing the
training and development, and those areas. And we've had particular questions through, and I think we're working through them. But it could be drama, it could be D&T. Where you need that practical activity really to keep the thing live. There's only so many worksheets that you're going to be able to work, to think about. And I think it's also the steer that online learning doesn't mean that you have to do the work online. And I think there's a misapprehension there. Okay, we're communicating it in this way, but that doesn't mean to say that there can't be a lot of practical activity and an activity going on away from a screen that probably is ultimately going to be captured there. But I think that there has been a misapprehension that everything's got to be fully online in that respect.
Definitely. I've seen you talk about the creative elements of learning, and I've seen so many resources out there, and the kids having a lot of fun learning at home with their families and their parents. And it actually fits in well with a question that Kate Knight, a teacher from our community, asked with the creative elements and arts becoming more prevalent and obviously being successful for a lot of parents at home. Do you think it's demonstrated that there is a need and an importance?
If it wasn't, I mean, and fortunately, I mean, when we were Ofsted back in October, one of the things that was picked up that was very much a strength of the school, and I mean, I've gone to the stake on that. But I think the emphasis that there is in the importance of the breadth of experience in that respect, probably again, that's going to be one of the benefits that comes out of this period once we're out of the other side, is because we're all all learning ought to be by definition creative, didn't it? But if we're thinking about very specifically the role of the creative curriculum, because we're all having to think in those sorts of ways, how much more can we learn in other areas about that? And perhaps one of the questions that came earlier about parental engagement, I think, fun and motivation. Young people I've always found that sport and music are great hooks into those sorts of areas, so one can begin to think about that. I also think that offers a particularly creative way in. So I think that's going to be a really positive benefit. We picked up on things as well at the National Theatre, some of the streamings that were going on there, and here's the opportunity to point young people into those areas and think about those areas perhaps in ways in which they might not have done, and open up a whole new world to them in that way. So I think there's a massive benefit there, because one of the things that we're doing and I should say that my 3 times a week comms is to parents, carers and students together as a single body, and that, as well as the sort of the operational stuff, all of the time in that we're signposting enrichment, and much of that is around creativity.
Brilliant. And do you think it will carry on once we emerge through this other side? Will it maintain its importance? And it sounds like obviously it has a.
I think it has to. I mean, I think the shift. If you think about the shift that we've seen in the last 7 days, this is fundamentally going to change the way in which we learn and work. Mm-hmm. And I think also, the potential, a very positive opportunity for the recalibration of the curriculum and the way in which we assess young people's competencies. I've always had a bit of a nervousness. I was a former chief examiner, but sitting young people 4 feet away from one another in silence with no access to technology isn't the best way to assess their ability to function in the modern world, is it? So perhaps, we will see some positive movement forward there as well, and the breadth of what young people can do and achieve.
Brilliant. And talking about what young people can do and achieve, obviously it's as important about what staff can achieve and what they can learn. And I mentioned we'd be talking about training in CPD. I'm going to pick out what I think was the most interesting question with regards to the future of training in CPD. With the impact of COVID-19, is there going to be NQTs coming in this year? What does that look like from your perspective as potentially looking at new NQTs coming in? Because effectively half of their year will be ended of their training stop.
Yeah, so whether that's new entrants to the profession coming out through a PGC or assessment only route, or currently sort of part probation that's been completed. I mean, I would have hoped, and certainly it's the case with the staff that we have here, that we've identified those young teachers' potential, their strengths and their areas for development. So I think that's just a question of how you extend that into the first term that we're back. I think we're knowing most of what we would hopefully know there, certainly about staff that we've got with us at the moment. And I don't see any fundamental change. You know, I'm obviously looking at all of the reports that have been written on their progress and seeing what's happened with their mentors and so forth. So I don't think any of that fundamentally changes, and it may well be actually, again, it's a great opportunity for some of our what might be less experienced staff, but might have greater knowledge and understanding of working in these newer and creative ways, actually to learn from them. So there's a degree of empowerment, I think there for them, and recognising the skill sets that they've got. I mean, from the point of view of, again, I suppose I'd parallel that from the point of view where it's through the university sector. I mean, I would be hoping that at this stage, given that we'd be moving into what would be, there's another question, what does the recruitment, the height of the recruitment period look like? We'd be making judgments on what that their host schools and what their universities would have been saying. I'd have watched them in a lesson, and I guess there's some learning here about how some of that might be recorded down the line. So we've got a kind of a video portfolio of teachers performing. It wouldn't be the first time that I haven't recruited through Skype or whatever it might be. We've had a very small number of teachers that have actually very successfully that we've taken overseas. But I think, you know, we might find ourselves in those sorts of positions. But I think it will just be an adjustment on the time that we are continuing to support them more directly. I mean, we're all on a learning curve anyway, so I don't foresee a major issue in that respect. Okay. If the structure is already in place in schools, then that should be fine.
And you talked. I saw in the comments earlier, I think Damien had mentioned in his school, they've not put any staff on furlough either, and they're actually using this time to focus on CPD for their current staff. So
huge. And I mean, just to pick up on that, and I mean, it's something that I think it'd be useful. You know, perhaps we can have a discussion about as well. I mean, we had a twilight session that's booked for the 21st of April that was going to be working with a high performance team, and in fact that's something which perhaps the community that's here might be interested in listening to, because the whole point about keeping teams together and keeping them performing, actually the timing of that's really good. But we're going to have the twilight inset with the presentations at the same time. Why not? But I mean, I think there's also significant use of such, or I'm not going to call it downtime because it's not, but the opportunity for more flexible use and blocking of time, and certainly for some of our non-teaching staff, this is about also getting really up to speed with some of the technology, so that they can actually be tutors to some of our teaching staff. And that's one of the things that we've looked at, that they're spending their time getting up to speed on Teams and other areas so that they can tutor us.
Brilliant. And talking about spend, it takes us on segue nicely into school finances. I'm just going to, as I said, we're running short on time, so I'm just going to pick out a key question from here. We've had a
if it's a value, Mike. I mean, obviously, the audience will have a view on this, but if at any point we want to reschedule, I'm happy to to carry on extended discussions. Absolutely fine.
I think given the number of questions, I think we'll have to be running another one of these.
Yeah, I think the number coming through, and I can't multitask. I'm not answering.
I'm trying my best.
It's the most that I can do to drink my tea discreetly at the same time as answering. Go
on. So the question I'd like to ask, Derek, has come from David Esser. He's asked if there's been any changes to school budgets and their allocation as a result of the situation. Also another one that kind of factors into that. How's it going to impact your school budget in the short and the long term?
Okay. Well, I mean, there may be some very marginal gains in that I'm not heating and lighting buildings in the same way that I was. We've very much focused for all sorts of reasons provision in a localised area. Had this kicked off in November, then that might have had more significance in terms of just the marginal saves there. I can't see anything particularly significant in that respect. What we're doing, and in conjunction with the local authority, is we're making notes of anything that we think we see as any additional expenditure. And although we're a trust, we're looking at that in the context of anything that might be able to be charged through in any particular way. We're especially thinking about what does year 6, year 7 transition look like, because that's unlikely to be physical. And I'm having some conversations with what that might look like, and is there any additional expense involved with that? But equally, I would have been budgeting time for that. So actually, my head of year 6, my director of studies for Key Stage 3, can probably have those conversations online. So it's probably a quid pro quo. Probably there's going to be a degree of save on consumables. So we're having a think there. The only other areas that for us are very specific. We run 2 sixth form academy programs, a football academy and a rugby academy, but the coaches there are effectively doing in parallel, and we buy in those programs. But in fairness, the coaches there are running the programs in the same way that our teachers are running them. So I can't look for or expect any sort of savage reductions there. That wouldn't be acting with integrity. So I mean, I don't think at the moment there's a major shift, and I think what we're seeing as well, and there's a genuine community spirit out there where online providers are coming along and supporting schools. I understand, what that might mean in the longer term, and that's absolutely right and proper if people are giving their time now. So I don't see that this sort of activity is particularly skewing things in any way. So at the moment, it's kind of business as usual in a financial sense on the very tight margins that we're operating at. I just before this one, I was meeting with my chair of finance and my business director, just thinking about what the implications actually are more for excuse me, the 2021 budget, in terms of what does the reintegration of schooling look like. Are we going to need, and I'd be absolutely, if I could recruit more maths and English teachers, that would be fine, but I haven't looked to push them through more maths and English lessons. What I've done is to look at the support that's available to them for a wellness curriculum and the support staff that mean that young people feel settled and confident and happy in school, because I was surprised they tend to achieve better as well, rather than forcing them more through any academic curriculum. But we're already beginning to think, are we going to need more support there? What is the, what are, I hesitate to use the word, but what are the traumas that are going to be involved? What might that mean in terms of more additional support? What does it mean in terms of phasing the time of the year? I'm very interested to find out what the examination boards are going to be doing about, in a large secondary school context, what fees look like and so forth. I mean, clearly, the boards are going to need to survive, but what's going to be the situation there?
And actually talking about the future situation, what things are going to look like, what do you think the impact will have on inspections by Ofsted? Will inspections carry on?
Well, I'm thrilled we had ours in October. I feel so much better for that. But no, I mean, clearly there's got to be a common sense and pragmatic approach to this. I mean, I don't think any of us who have led schools, been involved in schools at any level. I know there's a number of colleagues who are the governors. I mean, I've worked in the real world. We never had any problem with accountability. I mean, I think this is the opportunity, and I think what this demonstrates is the power of collegiality and the power that we learn from one another. And one of the issues that, you know, I think there's always been with Ofsted, and I've had seven, I've been through 7, I think, as a head in the 33 years that I've been involved in education, which, whatever it is, quarter of a century, which has been so, as a head teacher. The issue for me is not that those colleagues haven't necessarily found things that you need to do about improving the school, but what has been the partnership on that moving forward? You know, where's the support to move schools forward generally? And I think what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of school support. We, you know, we aren't as guarded as we may have been in the sort of environment that's been created, where, let's be honest, it has been a competitive paradigm. Then I think this could see a shift there. So I don't think, you know, accountability per se and the opportunity to consider what practice is like necessarily needs to be lost. But my goodness me, we can do it in different sorts of ways, I think. And I don't think Ofsted can look the same after this. Or should it look the same?
Well, that's a theme, isn't it? That I don't think education, I don't think life itself,
the world.
It doesn't necessarily mean for the worse either. I think there's a lot of silver linings to what we're experiencing currently.
Yeah. No, I can see that, you know, from this. I mean, and you know, it's been an argument all along, isn't it? And you know, it's been at the heart of what Nexus has done in terms of looking to share practice in a really creative way and bring schools together. You know, will be, you know, what are the opportunities for those clusters, those partnerships of schools, you know, to you know, in a way, I hate this phrase, but be critical friends, and in a non judgmental way. This has brought colleagues together in all sorts of ways, although paradoxically socially distancing them.
I don't like the phrase socially distancing.
No,
physical distancing and
physical. Well, I'm going to signal one of my blogs that I did on that, and I said physical separation, yes. Mm-hmm. Social distancing, no. That's the absolute thing. That's the antithesis of what we need to be doing at this time.
Of course, I think if anything, I've seen more communities becoming more sociable. Through this, which is a brilliant thing. We've touched a lot on the future aspects and how you're coping at the moment, Derek. I just want to finish on a question which I hope will be a good one to finish on, and looking forward to the future. We just had a question there from Claire Ashton about where your blogs are. I will post the link to Derek's blog if you're happy.
I do a weekly one on the school. If you like 70s and 80s music and sport, you're in for a great time.
So I'll put that on for you shortly, Claire.
Right.
The final question I'd like to ask just before we wrap things up. Have you had any positive surprises since it was announced that schools were to close, Derek? And would you mind sharing them?
Oh, great question. I think I'd revisit the elements of the previous discussion, which has been the collegiality, not just obviously within one's own school, which you hope culturally you got close to. That's not got to say, you know, at any one particular time you're not going to have discontented voices, and you need that degree of dissonance to some extent to move forward. But I think there's been a massive positive in that respect, bringing schools together. I mean, we wouldn't have necessarily had this conversation in this way. I mean, you know, you started by saying, you know, about my connection with Nexus, and I was really attracted to it when, you know, 18 months ago I began to see what was going on, because, you know, this is we want to share practice, and we want to learn from each other. And I think, you know, there wouldn't have necessarily been this sort of opportunity in this way, given the frenetic nature of school life. I think as leaders, there's also perhaps more time for reflection and really going back to what brought us into this, which was about the creativity of the curriculum. I came into this game 33 years ago to be the most brilliant teacher of history that I could, and inspiring and want young people to learn in the most creative ways. I guess you then move to want to make the difference differently in creating those sorts of situations. But given what happens in the day job, you don't necessarily get that sort of space. I'm not, I'm now on, 15 Zoom or Teams meetings a day. That will calm. And I think there's a real opportunity for positive reflection in so many ways that will make a difference for our young people and the young people that day to day teach them and support all the colleagues in schools. And, that's got to be massively exciting, hasn't it?
Certainly has. It certainly has, and hopefully those Zoom conversations have gone with less hitches as we have today. But thank you everyone for bearing with us through that. We've had brilliant engagement. We've had loads of questions. So really sorry for anyone who's put a question forward that I've not had a chance to ask. We've had loads, so we're definitely going to be looking at running more of these types of sessions if they're useful to you. So please do let us know, feedback to us. Critical criticism is essential, so please do give that back. I'd like to say thank you very much, Derek, for all your time today, and sharing a bit of your kind of knowledge and expertise with everyone. I'm sure it will be useful, and looking at the comments coming through, there's a lot of people who have really appreciated it.
Well, couldn't be more of a pleasure, and thank you for setting it up, and also for all of the colleagues for the questions, and obviously I'm sure the massive amount of fantastic practice that's out there, and the ability to share that is just so hugely rewarding. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Derek, and thank you again for David for hosting the session. Thank you to Damien for regulating the chats there, and getting on to sorting out the issues we're having. Apologies for any of the language or anything that was seen during that. It's one of the wonders of the internet. There's always going to be trolls, but don't feed them is our motto. So hopefully that got them bored quickly and out of the way. We'll be ending the webinar shortly, but I'm just going to post a link to our subscribe page. So if anyone wants to keep in touch, if we are hosting more, feel free to subscribe there, and you'll get a notification through when we're running the next session. But thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you found it as useful as I did, and thank you again, Derek.
Pleasure. Thanks. Bye everyone.
See you everyone.